Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Studio X. I'm sure most of you, or at least some of you, know about what Studio X does, but I'll just take 2 minutes to kind of explain a little bit about what we've been doing over the past year. My name is Rajiv Thakur. I'm the director of the space. Studio X is a initiative by the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, Columbia University. And we are basically what I would say is a kind of an empty container for thought and research and ideas to come together on the future of cities. So Columbia has taken this initiative in the last 2.5 years to open up a series of spaces, Bombay being one of them, the original one being in New York. And we have spaces in Rio de Janeiro, we have spaces in Beijing, Amman, we have a small lab in Paris, Sao Paulo, and we have a small lab in Tokyo as well. And we'll be opening up spaces in Johannesburg, Istanbul, and Moscow in the next 6 to 8 months. The projects we've done over the last 1 year have ranged anywhere from art workshops to workshops on educational space. We've had conferences on urban planning issues. We'd have major architects speak about the work that they're doing internationally and domestically in India. So the space is quite broad range, and I suggest anybody who is interested in doing any research, we are not necessarily funding the research, but we're funding the space. So for events like tonight and any other events, we do not charge any fees for people to express themselves or have their ideas kind of put out into the public forum. So I would ask anybody who's interested in doing research or even proposing a talk or a discussion to come forward to me after tonight's event, and we can discuss that. In any case, I will just pass it on to Pooja to start the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Multipolis Mumbai. I would like to start this evening's program with a short video introducing you to Avid. Avid, as you saw briefly, is an SR Foundation initiative fostering creative learning across the fields of literature, culture and heritage, and arts, including visual, performing, and applied arts. It continuously aspires to conduct short-term, comprehensive lifestyle courses which address the limitation of available time and passion to learn niche subjects. Multipolis Mumbai, brought to you by Avid Learning in association with Studio X and TimeOut India, is a platform for exchange of ideas, a series that brings together the worlds of art, architecture, culture, design, film, food, fashion, literature, music, philosophy, and theatre, fostering a whole new kind of conversation about our city and its way of incubating and supporting new forms of creativity. This series premieres with architecture and our city, paying special attention to the industry's growth and influence on Mumbai and vice versa. Each program on Multipolis Mumbai will be a discussion panel with industry experts moderated by Naresh Fernandes, journalist, former editor-in-chief TimeOut, and author. Naresh's knowledge of Mumbai and all the things that make our city special is extraordinary. We have this evening with us Ms. Deepshikha Jain, Ms. Brinda Somaya, and Mr. Mustansir Dalvi. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to all the speakers, to Studio X and TimeOut India for their support, and particularly to Naresh Fernandes, Rajiv Thakkar, and Chanda Chaudhary Barai for their available time to put together this session for Multipolis Mumbai. With this, I now hand over to Naresh. Thank you.
Azad, this place back there. Good evening and welcome to the first event in a series that we at AVID are calling Multipolis Mumbai. Each month we're going to explore a specific theme that shapes our city, drawing on the knowledge and the opinions of people who are experts in the field. Today we kick off with a discussion titled Architecture in Our City. We couldn't have chosen a better venue to contemplate Bombay's architecture than this vantage point here at Studio X. All around us are classic buildings that are icons of this city. And if you were to pull up those windows or wander back there, you'd see some of them. Structures such as VT Station and the GPO and the BMC headquarters. These are exuberant expressions of the material, climatic, and cultural specificities of Bombay. But as the experts on our panel will demonstrate in their presentations, architectural practice in this city is also rife with challenges. Some of those challenges are embodied in the Bandra Worldly ceiling, the image of which is featured on our invitation card for this event. I love that surreal moment when you're getting off the ceiling at Worldly from the Bandra side, and there's an arrow which says South Bombay, but you actually end up going to the north for a couple of 100 meters until you double up around the traffic circle. The sea-link, as you know, cost 6 times more than expected and took more than 10 years to complete. That's about 5 years longer than it was expected to. Along the way, it had to be redesigned because they forgot that there was a fishing village along the way whose inhabitants needed access to open water. When you drive by in the morning, on the side you see several people on the shore defecating in the open. A reminder that the majority of the residents of our city live in shanties without access to a toilet. Besides, building this bridge for cars meant theoretically drawing away resources from public transport in a city in which 88% of commuting proceeds in over-congested trains and buses. The sea-link is a good example of how design cannot exist in a vacuum and ignores socio-economic realities. So without further ado, let's meet the panel. First, Brinda Somaya, an architect and urban conservationist. She graduated from the JJ College of Architecture in Mumbai and has a master's and a Master's of Arts degree from Smith College in the US. She believes that development must proceed without burdening the cultural and historic environment. The architect's role is that of a guardian, she says. She is the conscience of the built and the unbuilt environment. This belief underlines her work at Somaya and Kalappa, the company she has founded and has headed for 3 decades. She has worked with corporate, industrial, and institutional clients, and her work extends to public spaces, which she has rebuilt and sometimes reinvented as pavements, parks, and plazas. Her projects include the Colaba Woods, Ganeshpuri Temple, and a slew of pavements in South Mumbai. She has also designed the reconstruction of an entire village in Kutch. Her projects include award-winning campuses such as Tata Consultancy Services Banyan Park in Mumbai, the Nalanda International School in Vadodara, and the Zenza Technologies Limited campus in Pune. One of my favorite of her projects is not so far from here, what used to be called Rally's House, which still looks the same from the outside, but which she's completely redesigned from the inside. And I was telling her that I have a special connection with it because my grandfather toiled there for 45 years. Deepshikha Jain is an architectural, industrial, and travel photographer. After graduating in architecture, and I think she studied with you, Mustansir, for some time in Bombay, she pursued a master's in philosophy in Paris. She sees herself as a hybrid practitioner who embraced one world without abandoning the other. Her passion for her subject has led her across the subcontinent and sometimes across the world to places in Europe and the UK, sometimes just to see why a piece of architecture or infrastructure was so highly rated, and at times just to be mesmerized by it, she said. Oh, sorry. What's the difference? Mustansir Dalvi, TimeOut columnist, I must add, is a professor of architecture at the Sir J.J. College of Architecture. He has postgraduate qualifications in architecture and Indian aesthetics from the University of Mumbai. He has lectured, read, and published research on urban semiotics, architectural education, architectural history, and heritage. His research is published in New Architecture and Urbanism, Developments of Indian Traditions with Smita Dalvi, his wife. He has written for the monographs Buildings That Shaped Mumbai, The Architecture of G.B. Matre, and it's a fascinating account of many of the buildings along the Oval, among other things. Quiet Conversations, The Architecture of Kamu Iyer, and Mulkraj Anand, Shaping the Indian Modern. And we often forget, of course, that Marg, which we now see it as an art journal, started off as an architecture journal. His most recent book with Y.D. Pitkar is The Romance of Red Stone, an appreciation of ornament on Islamic architecture in India. He is also published in several architectural journals. In addition to writing a column for TimeOut, he also writes a column for First Post. In his writings and talks, Mustansir Dalvi critically observes Mumbai's urbanity and charts the semiotics of its contradictions. He is particularly interested in the development of Bombay's architecture during its emergence as a vibrant metropolis. So, without further ado, let's listen to your presentation, please.
You know, they've been so, Mumbai really is the flavor of the world just now. Maybe with or because of, in spite of its warts and interests and pluses and minuses. So, and there have been so many conferences also going on. I just want to tell you before I start that I'm not going to, I don't have any solutions for issues, and I'm just going to tell you about 3 decades of my practice and how I have lived, schooled here and worked here, and what I see as my city. I think I have about 10 minutes, is that right? Okay, so you'll have to bear with me that I'm not going to show you something of a rocket scientist preparation or production. Continuity and change is something that I've always believed in because I have lived in Mumbai for almost half a century, which tells you it's a very, very long time, and my practice is over 3 decades. I believe that a city should be remembered for 4 things. And while all of us can't change everything that is around us, I believe that we are all a possibility always is to there is a God of small projects, and it is often the accumulation of small little projects all put together that can change things around you. Of course, it's important to have vision and big ideas and grand ideas, but working in a city and living in a city like Mumbai, sometimes that's not always possible. And so my belief has always been that whatever each one of us can do around us is what we should do. I believe that, of course, adequate infrastructure is something we need, but there are 3 other things that I think are very important for any city, and particularly my city, which is, I'm sure, most of yours as well today. There has to be a sense of belonging, a sense of place, and there has to be equality. We know the huge changes that are happening in our city. We don't want to end up taking the last point first, where we have tall high-rises with compound walls around sort of the rich ghettos, and outside we have everybody else living. And to me, that is what is happening in many parts of the city. It is very disturbing because we have always been proud of belonging to a city where all economic levels and all cultural and social levels lived and worked together, which is what Jane Jacobs said in her own way. And when I went to South Africa many years ago, when I went to South Africa many years ago, I remember seeing one part of the city which was, of course, exclusively white. And then you had the colored section, which was the mix, which was sort of like the United States used to be in the 50s and 60s. And then you had the slums, which were just like our poorest urban slums, not the improved slums that we see today. And I thought to myself, you know, that's a great pity because you don't even know, you lose sensitivity to what's around you. And to me, that equality is something which is disturbing, that it is going away from Mumbai, and that has to be looked at. A sense of place. Of course, a sense of place is very important for me as an architect. I do a lot of new work as well and contemporary work, which is really how we can survive. But restoration and conserving ordinary buildings as well as special buildings is very important. We shouldn't just look after the very important buildings, which anyway are looked after much better. But we have a huge quantum of very ordinary buildings which had a life and which should continue to have a life, which should be recycled, retrofitted, re-engineered, and reused. It's most important that that continues to happen. A sense of belonging in a city like ours where we have huge migration, how do you create that sense of belonging? We have a population that moves. We have a tilted population with a lot more men than women because of the social fabric of our country itself. And we have a very disparate, both in terms of economic, cultural, and social level, people who belong to the city. How do we create a sense of belonging to everybody who lives in the city? Well, in many ways this is happening, and today I'm sure you have many things ahead of you where all these issues will be discussed. But as an architect, these are also very, very important points. And then, of course, finally, adequate infrastructure, which I'm not going to go into now. We know, as Jane Jacobs said, what do you need for a city to survive? And Bombay had all these things in the 60s when I grew up. We had good pavements to walk on. There were a lot of public spaces for the number of people who lived there, which must have been 3 million, 4 million, as against almost 20 million today. We had old and new buildings, and there was a district diversity where you had commercial and residential together in the same areas. You didn't have Bandra Kurla complex where no one's allowed to stay, and Nariman Point where no one's allowed to stay, and then you have the residential areas separate. Neighborhood stores, of course, and short legs of intersecting streets, which is very, very important, and which is why Navi Mumbai has its inherent weaknesses, as we all know. So the future is, if a building, as an architect, again I'm talking, destroys the site where it existed, ignores the context of what's around you, and offends its neighbors, and of course finally wastes limited resources. We talk so much about LEED certification, but what does it do? You have glass and you have aluminum, and then you say you're LEED certified because of capital investment, and then nobody checks up later as to what the final results are. So I have some major problems with some of these issues, and I'm not very popular at green building congresses, and they call me the third day when all the important people who are selling their products have left, and then they come and they say, this is what we really wanted to hear. But in fact, in reality, that doesn't happen. And neglects the user. Do you ask the user what they really want? So, of course, we know all this, what existed, the mills and the reclamations, the slums, all of which we should be proud of. And we should never be ashamed of any part of our city. If we get ashamed of things we see, then we don't do anything about it. We have to understand why it is there and how we address it. I grew up on Cuff Parade when it didn't, not 100 years back, but a lot of it was like this. We had beautiful old bungalows, and there was an elevated promenade where I used to take my dogs for a walk. And this was before the reclamation came up. So you can see in a lifetime, in my lifetime, how much of change this city has taken and what is going to happen, which I suppose young people like this are going to tell you. What is the future going to build? And are we going to have just BKCs and Nariman points? We also know how people have fought within the city. This is the sense of place and the sense of belonging for the Oval Maidan before and after. We know about the gateway and trying to reclaim, trying to protect it in different ways. But this is also happening. And it's very difficult to prevent it when adequate support systems are not given to people who own the heritage buildings. So do we really want this instead? You know, I don't think so. Sometimes I almost wish that knock the building down and build a good contemporary building its place, but don't do these sort of things that we see all over our city. So I've just chosen, before I end up, 5 minutes more? Yeah? Okay. Just a few projects, just 3 or 4 I've chosen, which my firm has done in South Mumbai, or the island city, which is essentially where I have grown up. The Calabar Woods, the 3 cathedral schools and their church, TCS House, and the Old Yacht Club. So Calabar Woods was actually a garbage dump. I used to live opposite it, and a group of us got together, supported by a corporate house, the Tatas, and we stopped the garbage. There was nothing else there, and we just planted trees. We used all the grey water from the buildings around for irrigation. And we got the government, the municipality, to give us lower rates for power and water. And the most important thing we did, I think, was we allowed this park to be used by everybody without any entrance fee. It was surrounded by slums on one side, very wealthy people on the other 3 sides. And what this did was a sense of ownership was created. You didn't have to pay that 2 rupee entrance, so anyone could come in. And it was the children of the slums really who have protected this park. It was the first one that was done on a PP, a public-private partnership, and led to many other parks being developed in the city of Mumbai over the last 30 years. This was when we, maybe about 4 or 5 years after we planted all the trees. Now it's used for sculpture courts, children play in it, and a small amphitheater. The 3 cathedral schools was a 7-year project. The challenge really was a lot of interventions had taken place. The buildings were in a bad condition, even though it was a good school. And everyone thought that the easiest thing often is to knock something down. And they were not all protected at that time, so we could have knocked one of them down. But what was done was the interventions which took place in the 70s with bad cement, the newer parts were in a bad condition. So we restored the older part, broke down all the new extensions which were built in the 70s, and rebuilt, expanded, upgraded, and brought it up for hopefully the next 50 years. So these are just some images of the 3 schools. That's the middle school, the senior school, and the junior school. These are all actually presentations by themselves because they're so huge. Then the board of governors came to me and they said the church was leaking and they wanted to know if I could repair the concrete roof. What we realized when we found an old postcard was it was never concrete, it was a pitched roof, and somewhere around 1930 it had been broken down. So I took that postcard, I went back to the Board of Governors. I thought, shot in the dark, they'll probably say no. I said, instead of repairing, can I rebuild the original roof? And they said yes. It's not leaked since then, so the upper corner is the concrete roof. It was a challenge to find out the angles, the sleepers, how to build up the new roof, but we did it. We also cleaned up the bell tower, all the spaces around the church as well as the interiors, and the pavement around the church, amongst other pavements which we've done. We bullied our clients that if you want us to do the work, you have to do the pavement around. And once the municipality actually came and asked us for money to permit us to do the pavement, of course I reported them, but anyway, it was done. This was interesting. It's the old yacht club, which was actually the real yacht club. It was going to be demolished in the 50s when it was given to the Department of Atomic Energy. But why it's historic and important, it gave birth to the urban heritage conservation movement in the city of Mumbai, which anyone who's read Shyam Chainani's book will know. It had been cut in half, which you can see, that's the picture down. It had been cut in half, and the entire building was going to be broken down when there was an IS officer who was far-thinking, and she came to me and asked us if we would restore the building and complete the extension, which we got permission for. Unfortunately, because of security, it is not open to the public, but it should be, I feel personally, and it has some of the most beautiful spaces in any building of the city of Mumbai. It's completely, these are the sort of rooms that are within this building that we have restored. This is the TCS house, which Naresh spoke about. Tata Consultancy Services bought it and wanted to make it into the international headquarters. I think they thought that maybe we would break it down because the entire inside had almost collapsed. But it was a beautiful building of Malad stone, and it was in such an important corner of the city in the historic 4th precinct also. So what we did was, it's a long story, but we preserved, did not touch the perimeter of the building. We supported it. I had many a nightmare. We had a cyclone that year. I went one morning and I thought the whole building must have fallen down, but it didn't. So you can see from the smaller pictures that we broke down, deconstructed the entire building, supporting the outside, and then rebuilt it again from the basement up. So that shows what can be done. And we did this entire building, which is the international headquarters, in about, I think, 15 months for 22 crores of rupees, which is not an enormous sum for something to save and build something of this standard. So reconstructing, rebuilding is not necessarily more expensive as often people think. This is after restoration. Some of you may have seen it. We added a facade at the back. We changed the elevators. We brought in light. We reconstructed the entire inside to make it the way it is. So looking into the future, the country is now a nation of young people. So how are cities going to change? The aspirations and dreams of young people are very, very different from the older people. So how do we look into the future? There are many things happening, but I have worked with Apostrophe, Professor Sidhu. We are working together on the Mumbai Esplanade project, where we want to create over 160 acres of contiguous landscaped area within the city. It's been going on almost a year now. Some of you may have read about it or come to our exhibition. I'm happy to tell you that it is moved through the 2 empowered committees, and now it is with the Mumbai Transformation Support Unit, MTSU, who have given it, have getting traffic studies concerned. So what we want to do is to finally tell the lakhs and lakhs of people who come out of Churchgate Station and VT Station that they have a right to exit from the station into plazas, and it's the cars that need to go through underpasses over the short east-west centers like is done in all parts of the world. It's very feasible. It's a very economical proposal, which may be why some people may not like to do it, because there won't be much money to be made. But we are fighting for it. You can see the plaza, the Eros building, as you see, and the getting rid of taking human beings and making us into squirrels and burrowing us underground, but respecting the lakhs of people who come out of the stations and letting them walk to their place of work in a proper and sensible manner. So where our next train stop is, the young people will have to take it further. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brinda. I was hoping to get through this discussion without invoking that bread building antilla. But since you brought up green certification, it's astonishing that it has green certification. In fact, the highest standards of green certification, that building, that enormous building for just a family of 4. So maybe that's among the things we can talk about later, green certification. Mustansir, will you now share your thoughts, please, on an appropriate architecture for Bombay?
Yes, thanks Naresh, and thank you Studio X and Chanda for the invite. I am just in recollection of a story. An architect was making a presentation a few years back at the NCPA about a building which the firm had restored, and it was, I think, on Pedder Road or Warden Road or one of those places where an older building, not of stone like this, but one of the older buildings with a lot of classical ornamental details and so on, and they had restored it. And in the act of restoration, they had made the building completely, kind of look the other direction. And when asked, that why did you make the building turn away from the road, the architect said, what is there to look at? And I think this is as much a metaphor for a very, very large part of the city, which includes us, people in this room, as anything else. Because in one sense, one does tend to live in an amazing state of denial about the city that is there all around us. So it's very difficult to answer a question about what is an appropriate architecture for the city of Mumbai. And the difficulty is twofold. One is that as a person who's done a little work in the history of Mumbai, there have been attempts to make an architecture appropriate for India, for example. But all those attempts have been made by the British. So that effectively skewed any chance of us trying to find an architecture that was appropriate for ourselves. But this is a historical kind of perspective. The second argument about an appropriate architecture for Mumbai is this, that why should there be an appropriate architecture for Mumbai? I do not believe that there has to be any prescriptive idea about what a good architecture for the city should be. A city can include so many different things. Like Walt Whitman says that, I am large, I contradict myself, I contain multitudes. And that is how a city should define itself. In a sense, architecture in any city is the result of the collective consciousness of the inhabitants of that city. So once again, it cannot be something that you can put down, but it is something that emerges out of a whole process of city development or urban development. I also believe that a city develops slowly, and it develops through iteration, and it develops through accretion, and that is how the city gets its character, it gets its urban form, it becomes, or it creates, as you just mentioned, a sense of belonging that we can all call our own and appreciate. And one of the problems with us today in our city is that the sense of slowness has been overshadowed by this great necessity to bring in, change, whether it is at an infrastructural level or the level of architecture itself. Any vision of a city that is cleansed of all its diversity and all its variety, in my opinion, is a ruse for control and exclusion. And that is another reason why I would not like to put down a description of what the city should be like. Because the moment you start saying you should have this and not have this, effectively you end up excluding a large population of the city. And I think it's a problem, especially today, when we have the vast majority of the city which is denied by the small minority of the city. Because even at the level of the state, the prevailing mantra is one of slum-free Mumbai by whatever 2020 or something like that. Whereas we do know now, as statistics keep coming to us, that more than or almost 70% of the city live in houses that they have built by themselves. And in these very strained kind of circumstances, with the most limited of resources, they are creating an entire substructure to the city, which one can happily say, you know, that what is there to look at. You all remember this story about a couple of years ago about, you know, in one of these television discussions, the actress Simi Garewal had made a mention about looking down from the Hotel Four Seasons and saying that everywhere I see Pakistani flags. Okay, and it's correct. I mean, if you go to the Hotel Four Seasons and you look out of it, and I think at least 3 out of 4 sides you will see slums. And of course you will see green flags, but then you will see saffron flags as well, and you will see blue flags as well. Okay, or you may not see any flags. It all depends on how you wish to interpret, you know, the other, because you have never interacted with them. In the last 6 months, we have been in our college extremely privileged to actually interact with a lot of people who live in these kind of neighborhoods, the erstwhile slum neighborhoods, which have developed to the point that today you can call them middle class neighborhoods. Okay. However, at the level of the state, they are still denied. They are still considered worthy of demolition and of reclamation. The city today is in its new stage of reclamation, where we want to reclaim land that is already built upon. Not, you know, reclaim land from the sea, but reclaim land from the city itself. The entire project of Dharavi, as far as I am concerned, is one monumental project of reclamation to extend Bandra Kurla complex. In this kind of state, how can we look at an architecture that is, you know, prescribed for the future, for the city? I like to call our city the dirty city, and I would like to embrace that phrase, because a clean city, the way it is envisioned, is simply a city in which a large number of people do not exist. A dirty city, on the other hand, includes everyone. It includes the variety, it includes the scales, it includes people from all levels of class. You know, historically, interestingly, for people who, like me, probably grew up in the city almost now 35, 40 years ago, we found a situation where, as far as housing was concerned, there was never any separation between the rich and the poor. If you go down, say, places like Kalba Devi, and which is one of the most dense parts of the city, you would find that on any important road or any small road, the very, very rich and the very, very poor would cohabit. Okay, and that was done in as unself-conscious a manner as possible, and it probably still is the case. So we do not really have a history of class distinction when it comes to public space in our city, and most certainly we would not like to bring it now. The way the city is being monetized for every square inch, unfortunately, very likely the city may end up bringing exactly those differences that one has never seen so far. One other point I would like to make is that architecture, to me, is the last resort. I believe the problems of our city are not the problems of architecture. The problems of our city, such as they are, emerge from this disparity and this state of denial, okay, where 70% of its inhabitants are considered worthy of removal by 30% of its inhabitants. And finally, if I was pushed to answer the question, what is an appropriate architecture for the city of Mumbai, I think the lessons can be learnt from the local architecture of the Konkan coast. This is something which extends right up to the southern parts of Gujarat and can go down right up to Kerala and even beyond. Because on the western coast of India, you have such a commonality of architectural of architectural elements, of architectural building and habitation that is so self-similar that you would be amazed by it. And in the early stages when this city was developing, a lot of the architecture of Bombay also followed a lot of the architecture of the Konkan. And there are still some examples which are there, in the city, which reflect this. Sometime back in a book on tropical architecture, Rahul Mehrotra had defined tropical architecture quite neatly, and it's something that has stayed in my mind all the time, that what is a good architecture for tropical places, hot and humid places like ours. He said that you should have very deep overhanging roofs and no walls at all. And this is something I think we should all remember, because the problem of our modernity and our kind of global situation is that we have an over fetishization of walls. Whether it is because of the use of glass and aluminium and so on, or whether it is because we are building tall buildings, walls are everything. When we do know that in a place, in our kind of climate and in our kind of region, what you need is ventilation. Okay, and what you need is to actually protect your walls from the elements. And that can only be done by having deeper roofs. And if I have to invoke Antilla, as we should all invoke Antilla, I would refer you all to pictures on Google of Antilla covered with blue tarpaulin during the last monsoon. How many of you have seen pictures of that? It was quite popular in the newspapers also. Okay, this clearly is a sign that if we do not design with the city's microclimate in mind, it will come back to haunt us, and not in entirely nice ways. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mustansir, for that statement on walls, both physical and metaphorical. And now, Deepshika, the philosophical photographer.
I only wish I was philosophical about it. But so, since we've heard so much about Mumbai, why don't we just take a visual journey through it? Like Sir said, let's call it the walled city. And let's just see it, because I don't really have much to talk about it. I've gone ahead and photographed it, so let's just have a look.
Why don't you talk us through the pictures as you go through them?
The Bombay that is... Okay, sorry. I think I'm loud enough without a mic. Hello? Okay, all right. The Bombay that is, Bombay plus Mumbai, an architectural view. I think we're a city in transition where we've not really left the old Bombay that was, and we're still progressing towards the new ideological Mumbai that everybody perceives. So I'd like to call it Bombay like we've always heard it since we were kids. All that a city will ever allow you is an angle on it, an oblique, indirect sample of what it contains or what passes through it, a point of view. It's by Peter Conrad. So I was supposed to speak on contemporary architecture. So contemporary means happening, existing, living, or coming into being during the same period of time. And architecture literally would mean the art or practice of designing and building structures, especially habitable ones. That's Borivali, Goregaon, Lokhandwala Andheri, Millat Nagar Andheri, Juhu. What then is the architecture of our times? If we had the Victorian era, or we have the Stone Age, and we have all these ages in architecture, which can be defined. Maybe not Stone Age, but okay. So what then is the architecture of our times? What would you call what we're building today? Santa Cruz. That's Santa Cruz East. Bandra Talao. Bandra Station Road. I'm sure, Brinda, that looked very different when 100 years back. Carter Road, Bandra. Sorry? Carter Road, Bandra. To one extent, if you've seen one city slum, you've seen them all. Dharavi. Matunga. Somehow that always looks like a slum to me after that picture. I don't know why. Maybe that is what slums would look like in the future. Dadar. Low Parel. Haji Ali. Architecture is and always will be concerned, roughly speaking, with carefully balancing horizontal things over vertical things. Tardeo. Antilla, let me also get part of the whole discussion about Antilla. Tardeo again. And Tardeo once more. Bombay Central. Grant Road. Any city, however small, is in fact divided into two. One, the city of the poor, the other of the rich. These are always at war with one another. Somehow Plato did not agree to Mr. Dalvi. Nepean Sea Road. Worli. Bandra Worli Sea Link. Walkeshwar looked quite different earlier, I guess. Raj Bhavan, Walkeshwar. A city bureaucrat in India would say, I have very little authority, very high expectations, huge human resource challenges, too much political interferences, too many agencies, too much jurisdictional schizophrenia. And anyway, I'm only here for 2 years, so let me try and do the best that I can. Churchgate. Cuff Parade. Fort. Colaba. The real conflict for space and funds in cities is between the cars infrastructure and social infrastructure such as schools, libraries, hospitals, and parks. If we really want to solve the problems of the poor, we have to make a very critical political decision, and we somehow have to decide that we are not going to make more and more highways every time we have a traffic jam. Panvel. Kharghar. Nerul. Seawoods. Ghatkopar. Vakola. Vision without action is a daydream, and an action without a vision is a nightmare. Santa Cruz. Dharavi. Matunga. Dadar. Low Parel. But look what we have built, low-income projects that become worse centers of delinquency, vandalism, and general social hopelessness than the slums they were supposed to replace. Cultural centers that are unable to support a good bookstore. Civic centers that are avoided by everyone but bums. Promenades that go from no place to nowhere and have no promenaders. Expressways that eviscerate great cities. This is not the rebuilding of cities, this is the sacking of cities. Jane Jacobs. Tardeo. Grant Road. Worli. Worli again. Hanging Gardens. I'm sure a lot of us remember this view from the Hanging Gardens, but it's just so completely different and unrecognizable anymore. I think I went to the Hanging Gardens since I was a child, so that's some 25 years ago, 20 years ago. Not 25, I was born 25 years ago. Every city has a sex and an age which have nothing to do with demography. Rome is feminine, so is Odessa. London is a teenager and urchin, and in this hasn't changed since the time of Dickens. Paris, I believe, is a man in his 20s in love with an older woman. That's by John Berger. And then I added a little line to it that says, and Mumbai was a girl with a royal upbringing who underwent a makeover to become a rebellious young teen. I'm not much of a writer, but I think that makes sense. Valkeshwar. Oval Maidan, Churchgate. Kolaba. Panvel. Nerul. All cities are mad, but the madness is gallant. All cities are beautiful, but the beauty is grim. Thank you.
Thanks, Deepshika. I'm going to attempt to tease this out a little more. In this oblique view of the city, it was quite clear that Panvel looked exactly like Parel.
Exactly.
Why did you choose to photograph these buildings? What do they say to you about Bombay architecture over the last 20 years?
It wasn't about photographing these buildings per se, it was more about photographing the landscape of Bombay as it stands today. So if you look at some of the buildings, you can see the same building from Matunga, the same building from Kolaba, the same building from Lower Parel. That's when I realized that Bombay is not really as big as we make it out to be. It's just that looking at one building from Santa Cruz, Matunga, wherever you go, you just see the same set of buildings. And one always wants to outweigh the other, in terms of height. It's like, okay, you built this much, so I'm going to go right up here. And who knows, maybe like I said, after Dharavi, the slide that I showed, they may look like slums later, So it's just that. That's what I think. That's the whole point of doing this project of, documenting the city.
I'm going to throw this open to the panel. It's always seemed to me that Bombay is a critique in concrete and steel of Manmohan Singh's policy of economic liberalization. The basic assumption of India's new policies is that if private benefit is maximized, all of society will somehow benefit. And yet our city's physical landscape shows this simply isn't true. The intersection of speculative capital on the one hand and unthoughtful or perhaps corrupt planners on the other has created a situation in which you have world-class, whatever that phrase means, individual housing developments and corporate offices in the middle of complete squalor. In a situation like this, what can architects do to enhance our sense of the public, even if policy does not require them to?
Well, I think we begin by changing definitions. It's something which I'm sure has occurred to a lot of people. But if we just stop calling slums slums, what would happen to the city? It would mean that now you have to do something about them. And you have to integrate them into the city because they are very much part of the same city that you inhabit. Only I have a certain issue with these photographs which Deepshika has shown is that they are all taken from a higher level. Okay, and what happens is that, and this is again an iterative thing, that you take things from a higher level, whatever you look down upon is squalor. And then you build something higher than that, then the earlier buildings look like squalor. Okay, so today, the buildings which we would otherwise have considered to be middle class housing of ground plus 4 and all that, can collectively look like a slum when you are photographing it from a 30-floor building. And that when that goes into the mindset is when we have the problem. What you have done is shown us such fabulous dystopian landscapes that are part of our city, but they are dystopian simply because we fail to recognize that they are part of the city. So if we did not call slums as slums, and we looked at them as something that you need to integrate with what there is rather than bringing in a lot of change, I think a lot of difference could be made. You talked about economic policies. You know, in this very budget, the finance minister has made these great allocations for what he calls affordable housing. But what are the allocations made? They are all subsidies to builders to build affordable housing. Okay. The truth of the matter is that in a city like Bombay, 70% of people build for themselves. They don't need the builders. However, these subsidies don't go to the people who can build for themselves. And therein is the disparity.
Brinda Somaya, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the problems are well known to most people. I think the biggest problem is that we don't have good governance, and we don't have any type of visionary leader who is willing to stay and lead our city for an adequate length of time to show the change that is required. So I think a lot of things, you know, we've heard over and over again. We all know a lot of these things. But until the system itself changes, I don't think there's going to be any major change. It's always going to be done in small ways. And I mean, we all know about so many towns in South America. You gave a quotation, I think, of the Bogota mayor, and how individuals can truly change, make big changes possible when there's good governance. So I think until that time comes, it's going to be very, very difficult.
I wonder if you could give us examples from the past, from Bombay's history, looking at districts in the city that perhaps were built to be, the architecture of these districts makes them inclusive, and what the rupture with that is now. Which of the parts of Bombay you think fostered a community spirit, a sense of the public?
Well, if you study, I mean, I'm not an expert on history as he is, but if you study the history of Mumbai or Bombay, you will find that developments took place very seriously when things were developed, whether it was the Parsi colony or the Hindu colony. These were all done with the civic improvement trusts which existed at that time, because there was a good bureaucracy, an honest bureaucracy, people with integrity, there was good governance. We come back to the single one important issue: good governance. Cuff Parade was developed as, again, the Oval Maidan, the reclamation. All these areas were developed individually and pieced together as part of the bigger scheme of things. So you were able to look at the big picture also. But we also have to be very realistic today. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe in the 60s we had 4 million. We have 20 million people today. And I think we have to accept that we have to have dense cities. We are not going to be able to have the luxury of, with all due respect, of roofs without walls. I mean, that's utopia and reference to context of Indian architecture. How do you bring that into skyscrapers? How do you bring these things into tall buildings? How do you accommodate the millions more who are coming in? So I think while we can restore, and I'm certainly part of it, we have to be very realistic about how do we build new as well, and how do we take care of those issues. We can't fight density all the time. We have to have denser cities because it's much cheaper. The more we go out and spread out, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the roads, and then we end up building more and more flyovers and more, bridges to bring us in. So I think architects and urban planners should be given more respect. They should be part of all decisions, which they've never been. If you see, I mean, I go on some of these committees to present or whatever, there won't be a single architect, there won't be a single urban planner. There'll be 10 bureaucrats who will be sending SMSs. There'll be 5 politicians who will be on the phone. And you're sitting saying, what am I doing over here? So there's no respect for our profession. There's no respect for planners. More planning schools have to come in. People have to understand the role of urban planners, urban designers, architects. Give them the due respect and make them head some of these committees. Make them in charge of some of these decisions. If these decisions are going to be made only by people who don't have the experience of many people who are not just trained, but who have worked in the field. They're 2 years here, then they're in the Ministry of Rural Habitation, then they're in some animal husbandry, and then they come and then they decide everything that's going to be done for the city, you know. So there is a systemic change that has to take place, otherwise everything is going to be cosmetic. And that will come only with education of the people, of people having a sense that the city is for all of them, the stakeholders, rich and poor within the city, that it belongs to all and everybody has to partake in it. And that will only come when education comes, when economic. So it's going to be a slow process. There are going to be no miracles. But I'm always an optimist. And I do believe that Mumbai or Bombay will always be a great city.
Deepshika, when you were photographing those dystopian landscapes, did you actually find any buildings that impressed you? Buildings that seemed to be rooted in a specific context, in our specific context?
That would make me think, because I really did not think one was any different from the other. The ones that really came up new, I really didn't think one was any different from the other. About governance, as Brinda Somaya was talking about, I'd just like to add a little photographic, give it a little photographic twist, if you might say. Governance is like an aerial view, where they just look at things from on top, not realizing what is really happening down there. And then people are like the street view, where we only see what is in front of us and 4 streets down or left or right, and we don't really know what's going on up there. So I think what we need is like a middle ground, where whatever we need to do, there has to be somebody in the middle trying to explain, both ways. Also, the other thing, I don't know. Okay, so we sympathize with the poor and we look at the slums and all of that, but there's a certain reality to all of that I differ, and I want to think that I don't think we should sympathize with the poor anymore. This is what I recently heard, that Dharavi is a slum. Okay, so since it's been getting so much attention, they're making the most of it. They appoint interior designers to build their houses from the inside, but then leave the slums to look like slums from the outside, to make the most of it.
I'm going to let Mustansir take this over.
I mean, it's just a point of view. I'm not defending or anything, but I'm just saying that this is a little different point of view that I'd like to speak about,
Mustansir, you have an answer to that?
I'm not prepared for this.
The study which we did in the college in the last 6 months, very interesting stories came out of that. One of the things is we were studying this slum in Devnar, which is built on top of a garbage dump, Shivaji Nagar, which is a very extensive slum, incidentally also promoted by the government because the entire design is on a grid plan. And out there, the houses that are built are now in a stage of development which we can call almost as middle class. Because when the houses are being redesigned, they are being redesigned using RCC frame, RCC slabs, brick infill, proper roofing, tiling, kitchens like you would like in your own homes, and toilets like you would like in your own homes. And that is happening in general. But there are no architects, there are only contractors who build this. And the contractors are extremely prolific. They have jobs and jobs and jobs. Okay, a large amount of work, and they know how to build perfectly in their circumstances, with the limited resources, with the limited space, and to build fast. And when I say fast, it's so fast you won't believe, so I'm not going to tell you. The point they made is this, that they have ways in which the outside of the building is made to look old. A new building is scratched and scraped and, dirtified, and the inside of the building, of course, is perfectly fine, expressing the aspirations of whoever has built and the resources and all that, because the one thing that makes these houses different from your houses is there is always the threat of demolition. Okay, and that can happen almost at an arbitrary, in an arbitrary way. There is no real method to the demolition. It's simply that you get caught on the wrong foot, they demolish your house. One of the ways in which demolition can be prevented is to make your house look as if it was always there. Okay, so the people who are living in these areas, they are no different from the rest of the city except for this one sword which hangs over them all the time. And we were talking with this contractor who was in a very bad state. He said, 20 साल में पहली बार हमारा घर तोड़ा. And what does this mean? The key point here is 20 साल. All right, it is not that if you are illegal, you are pointed out as being illegal and the government goes and gets you. No, it's not that way. It is that you are living in a circumstance which is entirely ad hoc. Okay, the very fact that you could build was because of the ad hocness, and the very fact that you could survive is because of the ad hocness, and if tomorrow your house is demolished, it is because of the ad hocness. Now this has larger implications on the city at large. So that's the problem with the large part of the city.
Azad.
I was in a presentation recently about the Brinda Bazaar area. The presentation was all about how they're planning to knock down all the buildings. I was in a presentation recently about the Brinda Bazaar area where they were presenting a plan about how they were going to knock down all the buildings that exist now and build up, as you were saying, in terms of density.
It's the cluster development plan.
Yeah, and I was just curious. I could see on both sides, right? When you're walking around the area, you clearly feel the lack of green space. But on the other hand, if you build up, then you destroy the character of the neighborhood. So I was just curious, if you took that as an example, how do you deal with this issue of what the community wants, what would be aesthetically pleasing for the city, and what's probably practical as well? So,
I know Mustansir had, you just spoke about this, but you grew up in this neighborhood, so would you like to talk about it?
Okay. Have you heard of a street called Mutton Street? aka Chor Bazaar. Okay, what happens to that when you have cluster development? Well, my thinking starts from there. That okay, these are very much part of the larger consciousness that we grew up in, that forms part of the memory base of the city, and we all partake in it, which is why we are this kind of collegial group out here. What unites us about this city is probably our memories of the city. The cluster development, first and foremost, is legislated by government, which means you can build because it is the law. Okay. The second part is important, is that should you build it because it is the law? When you are going to take 200 buildings and make 20 buildings out of them, I think that is where you need to think a little more deeply about what you are going to do in that particular area. Okay, now these areas that I grew up in, some of these areas are areas where the narrowest street has a character and a name, and shops that are there only for certain things. Right next to Bhendi Bazaar is a place called Nakhuda Mohalla, which is a place where you could buy clothing, drapery and clothing and so on. And these are things which would just vanish overnight. Okay, I told in my remarks I did say that a city grows slowly. Okay, the problem with cluster developments is you're going to bring in instant change, and obviously you will deal with it after the fact. Okay, 5 years after the cluster development has come in place, we'll be looking back at it and saying that have we gained anything? In the same way that now after 10 years of the flyover that goes straight over Muhammad Ali Road, we rue the loss of the road that is below. That is the road we grew up in, because that flyover has completely cut it into one side and the other side. Whereas earlier, even though there was a vehicular road over there, the road was seen as something which had two sides, okay, not which is two parts. So these are things which we need to think about. The worry is that this is legislated by the government in the form of a cluster development rule, which means that you can take vast clusters of the city and plan for redeveloping it as a singular kind of redevelopment.
Brinda?
I think what he said is very important. These are very, very difficult questions to answer. I know this Bindi Bazaar has actually been worked out by people who live, a lot of people who live in that area, and what are their aspirations, what are their present conditions, and what are they looking for. I think some of these things also have to be understood and studied. I think it will be a big disaster if the entire island city and beyond gets demolished in this cluster development. I think that is a big issue. But I don't think there are any easy answers if you then develop in smaller areas, smaller groups, and see how that comes up. The condition of some of these buildings are really, really bad. The congestion is enormous. We have to understand the difference between romanticizing, nostalgia, reality, aspirations. These are all important words in the growth of a city. And I think with each age group that's going to change. What I believe is that the citizens of our city must understand and belong to the city, and then they will do, we have to have that faith that finally they will do what they feel is the best. It cannot be in the hands of a few to dictate to the entire city what should be done and what should not be done. That's my personal opinion.
Deepshika, where do you stand on densification? A lot of your your photographs seem to suggest that densification is not necessarily a beautiful thing.
I really think it's not a beautiful thing, but then, like Brinda just said, that there's a difference between what's going on out there in reality versus us romanticizing and talking about it here. Because I have friends who live in these old buildings and they desperately want to just get their repair work done, but they can't do it because if they fix 4 tiles above a certain height, the whole wall will come down. So that's their reality. Versus us sitting here, we can talk very nicely about those cities, about those places and those parts in Bombay that will soon vanish. But then that is going to happen. And that's what I think.
Mukti.
So it seems to me that this question probably speaks to things that all three of you said. It seems to me that as with aspirations, what people value and people's taste changes, so that you no longer actually want the deep overhanging roof that looks like an old-fashioned home, right? And the glass tower seems modern and aspirational. Is there anything we can, this is going to sound snooty and I don't mean it like that, but can we do something about tastes? I mean, you're educators that are working with people who have design sense and taste. Can we do something where what people value in terms of what things look like becomes more aligned with what we hope a city looks like?
So what is taste and whose taste is it? You come down to this. But at the same time, I do believe, of course, that there are aesthetics and there is good taste and there is an aesthetic which has to exist. I think we see lack of good taste for whatever reason in our tier 2 cities. Mumbai is one city which at least has a critical mass of the old, both in terms of buildings and in open spaces that still exist. If any of you go to Bangalore, every time I go, I don't know where I am, literally. And I belong there, and it's changed completely. If you go to tier 2 cities like, say, Indore and a lot of these smaller, you see the little, the concrete ground. I mean, they're really ugly. I've often wondered that. I think it will come from, India is not one country. We have people from so many different parts. And so each one brings their sense into the city. and what is their aesthetic sense? If you have people from Kerala, they know they can't bring their